All right, welcome to part 2 of 1.4. So we left off here on how to square a trig function. And so now 1.4, which is Introduction to Identities, we can take a look at the Pythagorean identities. All right, go ahead and continue taking notes. All right, the Pythagorean identities. So these identities are going to play a bigger role in the section after this, where you have to verify identities and where you have to simplify some trig expressions. So and these become important sometimes in calculus. Sometimes you want to rewrite an expression, a trig expression, in a different way that allows you to do calculus with it. Okay. All right, so let's take a look here. So the Pythagorean identities, you actually have 3 of them. Okay, so the first one is cosine squared theta plus sine squared theta equals 1. So you can see why this is considered a Pythagorean identity. We see it has that Pythagorean form, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where 1 squared is 1. Okay, so here it does have that structure. All right, the second one is 1 plus tangent squared theta equals secant squared theta. Okay, and again, this one also still has the Pythagorean structure, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And we have the third one, cotangent squared theta plus 1 equals cosecant squared theta. And again, you do have that a squared plus b squared equals c squared structure. Okay, so I usually have students memorize just the first one. I think it's good to memorize all 3, but if you only memorize the first one, you can derive the other 2 and just write it on the top of your test. Okay, so let me show you why these hold true. Okay, so so the rest of this video is showing you how we get these. Okay, where they come from. All right, so let's take a look and see how. All right, and I'm going to start with the first one. And once I can derive this first one, then I can derive the other 2 from this first one. Okay, so let's see how cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. Okay, so that first Pythagorean identity. Okay, so so first of all, let's go ahead and take a look at the first definition of trig functions that connects x, y, and r. Okay, so by Pythagorean, right, if I drop a perpendicular there, then I know this is an x distance and this is a y distance, right? And so we see here that because we have that right triangle, we see that x squared plus y squared equals r squared, right? Okay, so we know that. We know that for right triangles. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides of this equation by r squared. Okay, and what happens is I will get x squared over r squared, y squared over r squared, and then r squared over r squared, which is 1. Okay? And then over here, another way to look at this is x over r squared and y over r squared. And here we know that sine theta is y over r, and cosine theta is x over r. So I could replace the x over r with cosine theta, and I can replace the y over r with sine theta. And there's your first Pythagorean identity. Cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. Okay? So this is your first Pythagorean identity. And you see how this Pythagorean identity is actually derived from using the Pythagorean theorem on x, y, and r over here. Okay? All right, so let's take a look and see how we get this second one. 1 plus tangent squared equals secant squared. All right? Okay, so now the second one. So I'm going to go ahead and write this down. Cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. Okay, so we know that. We know that one, and we know where it comes from. And so we know this one is true. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to go ahead and take this equation, cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1, and I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by cosine squared. Okay, and when I do that, cosine squared divided by cosine squared is 1. And then I'm going to get sine squared divided by cosine squared, and 1 divided by cosine squared. Okay? And here we know sine over cosine. In the first part of the video, we know that sine over cosine is one of those ratio identities. Sine over cosine is tangent. So here we get tangent squared. And we know 1 over cosine, the reciprocal of cosine, is secant. So here is your second Pythagorean identity. And it comes from taking the first one and dividing it by cosine squared. Pretty cool, huh? And then the third one, let's go back up. Okay, so we got the first two, so we're going to do the third one. Cotangent squared plus 1 equals cosecant squared. Okay, so again, I'm going to take that first one, that first Pythagorean that we got. Okay, so there's the first Pythagorean identity. And so you'll see that that's why I say you don't really have to memorize all three. If you just memorize that first one, you can derive the other two. All right, so over here, to get the second one, we divide by cosine squared. So over here, for the third one, we're going to divide by sine squared. Okay? So let's see what happens here. So I get cosine squared over sine squared. Sine squared over sine squared is 1. And then 1 over sine squared. Okay? And again, here we have the ratio identity. So cosine over sine is cotangent. And 1 over sine is the reciprocal. So we get cosecant. And there's your third identity. Okay, so we got the second one by dividing the first Pythagorean identity by cosine squared, and we get the third one by dividing it by sine squared. Okay, so that's how we get them. Now in this section, you could use these identities to evaluate some of those trig functions that they're asking you to find, or you could just continue using the methods you've already learned. Like I said, these identities will come into play more in the next section 1.5 and later on. Okay? If you have any questions, make sure you email me or text message me.